Thanks, everyone. Sounds like I'm coming through loud and clear through the speakers, but you can shout at me to speak up if you need. That's definitely a tough talk to follow. Sarah is great. Was quite the seasoned expert at these talks, so that was very interesting. I'll see what I can do. And I'll be talking about reducing and replacing DCM in semi-volatile organic compound extraction through optimized SPE workflow. So I'm with PromoChrom Technologies. We are part of the Scalar group as well. So if you know us, we're PromoChrom very much SPE focused. So I've got a couple of mandatory background slides. I don't think any of this will be news to anyone here. It's all well within our professional expertise. But I was thinking about this as I was seeing other talkers, other speakers cover a lot of the same kind of general goals. And I felt a little awkward about it at first, but then I did remember there is value in repetition. And of course, it's always heartening to see that we're working towards essentially the same outcome. Protecting human health, environmental health. So within that context, of course, a common health concern that we all are often concerned about is contamination of drinking water with pollutants, including semi-volatile organic compounds. So within this class, some common compounds would be pesticides, PCBs, PAHs, and phthalates. I'm not actually covering PFAS today. So you'll get a bit of a break from PFAS, which is nice, I guess. Now for the SVOC methods, traditional approaches with a separatory funnel is a very common method still used today. I say traditional because it has been around for a while, but of course there are really fascinating innovations going on as well. Saw some talks earlier this show, Johnny Mitchell, Julian Martinez, taking really interesting new steps towards liquid-liquid extraction. But since we are a solid phase extraction automation company, the lens we look at this challenge through is through SPE. And so EPA methods 525.2 and 525.3 are commonly used SPE methods for determining these SVOCs in drinking water. Now, part of these SPE procedures, as well as the liquid-liquid extraction procedures, are of course to use dichloromethane, which is a fantastic solvent chemically, just happens to have, of course, a number of very problematic health risks that people working with it in the laboratory might be exposed to it, as well as, again, potentially putting it into the environment. So health risks like increased cancer risk, neurotoxicity, organ damage, irritation, various membranes and organs, all considerations. And the old-fashioned or the original liquid-liquid extraction with a large volume sample in a separatory funnel does use copious amounts of DCM. I think that's a fair word to use here. 360 mils might be the volume of DCM that's being used per sample. So how do we kind of get away from that very high number? Well, using SPE, you're extracting the chemical, your analytes of interest chemically using essentially a solid phase to remove that from your sample matrix. So that reduces the amount of DCM required. Although running an SPE manifold manually does still require a person, an operator standing in front of those cartridges, essentially handling all the solvents. So there is still human exposure, of course. Again, probably no surprises, at least in the first half of the slide. Last year, the EPA issued a rule on the regulation of DCM based on these health effects. And this year, of course, we know there is some mandatory employee DCM exposure monitoring that they're mandating. So how do environmental labs adapt when this substance is so helpful for taking basically a measurement to protect human health is also a risk to human health in and of itself? How do we adapt when the EPA methods that are often required to be followed require DCM, but again, you're also, on the other hand, we're being asked to restrict or remove it from the lab. So one way to reduce DCM use could be switching from LLE, liquid-liquid, to SPE. By then taking that SPE process and automating it, then you're removing the personal exposure, reducing the personal exposure. There's less time of a person actually handling the substance. And then, you know, I was thinking back to earlier in my career, I did a little bit of a few courses in occupational hygiene, and for exposure reduction, a couple of measures like PPE, administrative controls, engineering controls are helpful, but the real, of course, ultimate solution is elimination. If we can eliminate the substance from the workplace, then there's really no reasonable risk of exposure. So in this talk, I'll be essentially covering a couple of studies that we did in-house, where we first looked at automating this method using essentially the EPA 525 procedure, and then moving from that to exploring alternative solvents to DCM. All right, if you've run any SPE methods, of course, selecting your SPE format, your media, is one of those decisions that has to be made. So in our procedure, as I mentioned, I'll be talking about the 525.3 version. We also did run it with 525.2. It is quite similar, but just in terms of the data I presented, it is the 525.3 data. We used a PromoChrom SPE03. That's our automated SPE system, our flagship system. And we also used our mini discs as the SPE media, as well as inline sodium sulfate drying columns. So just to go over quickly this Venn diagram here, this is just essentially showing a dichotomy of SPE media. Over on the right, we have SPE discs, which have a couple advantages. They are usually large in cross-sectional area, 47 to 50 millimeters, so they can handle high flow rates, and they're clog resistant due to essentially the large surface area, but there are limited commercially available options. It is more difficult to integrate them into an automated system, and they do use a higher volume of solvent. So to go with a high solvent choice in this case would defeat the purpose in some regard. Then on the other side, we've got cartridges, really the most common choice for SPE methods in general. So they are widely available with lots of variety, commercially available. They're compact, they have a smaller or lower solvent volume required, but they do require a lower flow rate and are more easily clogged. So our SPE mini discs that we supply as PromoChrom, we really set out to get the best of both worlds. So they're 30 millimeters in diameter, so that allows for a higher flow rate than cartridges, easier to integrate into a system than large discs, but they still use relatively low solvent volume and are more clog resistant than cartridges. Okay, and so here's just a quick simplification of the workflow for running this method with those materials. So starting off on the right, we have sample prep. I guess it's a bit misleading because extraction is also sample prep. That's preparing the samples for extraction, simply adjusting pH, adding preservatives, your spikes, etc. Then they're loaded onto the SPE03. We ran it with 1 liter samples. The system runs 8 samples in parallel. And again, using our mini discs and the inline sodium sulfate drying columns. And then after the collection of the extracts, following just a very standard concentration and microvialing procedure, and using a matrix match calibration for quantification. So all in all, if you're just thinking about how this might work, what this would look like in the lab, the whole process is about 4 hours, a little under 4 hours. A lot of that is hands-off time, so the operator can be preparing the next run. And so we were able to complete 2 runs of 8 samples, 16 1-liter samples extracted within an 8-hour workday. It's very realistic to achieve that. Okay, so the first study was using the same solvents as outlined in the method, so that does still include DCM. We've got solvent 4 there, DCM, and solvent 5, a mixture of DCM and ethyl acetate. Purpose here was really just to demonstrate that the automation system the mini discs and the drying columns used in that workflow can hit all the method targets. The sodium sulfate drying columns that I alluded to earlier, sorry, no pun intended there, they are just added in line with the mini discs. And so these do require a quick conditioning step before the run, but that can be also run on the automated system. We essentially precondition and wash it with the elution solvents. Then nothing too surprising with the pre-extraction steps, really just, again, following the method as written, adding preservatives, spikes, making sure the pH is adjusted properly. And then, so the samples are then loaded onto the SPE03. You can see them here in the amber glass bottles with some aluminum foil. Found a couple light-sensitive compounds that benefited from amber glass, and a couple volatile compounds benefited from covering the top of the bottles with the foil. But once that's loaded, you would add your mini discs to the cartridge rack here. As you can see, they fit shoulder to shoulder. There's no additional configuration, modification, anything required. And then it's as simple as pressing start on the pre-programmed 525 method. I should say there is one manual intervention before the elution. These inline drying columns are attached. So if you've done this method before where you add loose sodium sulfate to your extract, the idea of these columns is they perform that step as your sample is eluted from the discs into your vials, and then what you collect in your vial can go immediately onto your concentration equipment. From that point onward, it's very simple. Just reconstitute, spike with internal standard, and transfer to GCMS. And we just used a pretty simple workhorse GCMS single quad, no fancy triple quad or our high-res mass spec was necessary here. Okay, getting to the good stuff, some results. So this is at the spike level we chose for the IBC, which was 2 ppb for PAHs and 1 ppb for PCBs. The red lines, as you can imagine, those are the thresholds for recovery. This was a fairly small statistical sample, so the N equals 8, but we saw passing recoveries at this level for all the PAHs and PCBs. For this portion of the study, we also did some low-level spikes at 0.2 ppb, and again, we see them all within the thresholds. At this level, the thresholds are expanded. It's allowable to recover with between 50 and 150%. Again, these compounds are passing. And then here we've just put together a chart of some of the commonly analyzed compounds. Not all the labs we work with do the full 525 list. So this captured some of those compounds that are often included with a shortened list. Many of them are pesticides, but we do have PAH and a phthalate over to the right side. But again, at the IBC level, all passing. And at the low level as well, all within the recovery limits, although you will notice a conspicuous absence on the right side of di-2-ethylhexyl adipate and di-2-ethylhexyl phthalate. We did find that background levels just across the laboratory, it's very difficult to get even blanks below this spike level. So they were over recovering is how you might interpret the data, but essentially getting a fully clean background wasn't possible. We have actually worked with labs who set their MDL at 0.5 ppb for these compounds, just because a perfectly clean or a background below that level is very difficult to achieve. Don't worry about this slide. That's just a summary of everything. We won't get into reading what's on the axes. Again, just the full picture of those compounds, really all hitting those thresholds. Okay, so the takeaways from this first study, the one that uses DCM with the automated setup. So all the tested analytes spiked at those 2 ppb or 1 ppb levels did recover within the 70 to 130% range. At the 0.2, the low spike, most of the analytes recovered within the 70 to 130, even though the allowable range is 50 to 150%. The total extraction time the extraction time is 148 minutes. With the full workflow, it's within 4 hours. And the total solvent usage is 35 milliliters ethyl acetate and 25 milliliters DCM per sample. So I was feeling pretty good about those numbers until I went to Johnny Mitchell and Julian's talks, where they were using, I think, about 4 milliliters of DCM per sample. So this is a great improvement over the 360 ml, but it's we can take it further. If liquid-liquid extraction can be hitting, you know, a fifth of that, then there's something else we should be able to do from the SPE side as well. So, alternative solvents. Can DCM be eliminated? I mean, that would be a fantastic goal to achieve. That's what we set out to test. And so we did 2 variations on a solvent substitution. The first variation essentially substitutes in hexane instead of DCM. You can see solvent 4 is pure hexane, and solvent 5 is a mixture, 1-to-1 mixture of hexane and ethyl acetate. And then the other variation we tried was just pure ethyl acetate as a substitute for the DCM. So how did those numbers look? So what we have here is each cluster of 3, you might see in the legend, the left gray bar is hexane ethyl acetate mixture, the middle green one is ethyl acetate, and the right blue bar is the DCM method, which is the same as the data I just showed earlier. So at these spike concentrations, we can see them all passing for the PAHs and the PCBs. So there's a bit of variation between the 2 methods, or between the 3 solvent approaches, but what we're very happy to see is there aren't bars well below the red line for those alternative solvent methods. Again, small trial, there's actually n equals 4, so we did essentially a side-by-side, 4 with one, 4 with another on the same run. But to see that they're passing, even with those initial trials, is of course very encouraging. So here's the same list of commonly analyzed compounds. Again, all passing that 70% threshold. And then here we have all the compounds, again, at the 2 ppb level, or the 1 ppb for the PCBs. So a couple, it looks quite good overall, of course, but at least with the criteria of getting in that range. There is just 1 bar on the right here that's above the threshold. That was a butyl benzyl phthalate, and we saw it above 100% in the DCM method. When we switched to pure ethyl acetate, it exceeded that limit by just a small margin. So our hypothesis at the moment that maybe that's contamination coming from the solvent. It kind of scaled with the ethyl acetate volume used as we went from a mixture to pure ethyl acetate, but that's still under investigation. And then 1 bar also over here that's kind of interesting. This 1 bar with the pure ethyl acetate that's below the 70% threshold, that is a cyanazine. Now, interestingly, it passed well with the hexane ethyl acetate mixture, but with ethyl acetate pure, it missed the threshold. So looking a bit more closely at that, there was an interesting matrix effect on a couple of these compounds on the triazine herbicides. When using pure ethyl acetate, we did see some chromatographic artifacts, I suppose. The ones on top are the standard on the left, the calibration standard, and then on the right is the hexane ethyl acetate peak, but the one on the bottom is the pure ethyl acetate extract. And so we can see some peak shifting, some broadening, and that affected the quantification. Interestingly, this was only observed when run at the pH level for EPA 525.3, so at about 3.8. But acidifying further to pH 2, we actually saw the peak more aligned with the expected retention time and with with less broadening. So one aspect of this, I guess, that we should keep in mind is we ran a matrix matched cal with DCM with that method, but not with the pure ethyl acetate. So that's potentially something that we would do moving forward and it would probably improve the recovery number. All right, so really taking a step back from those numbers, what can we say from this study, from the alternative solvent substitution? So overall, the general trend was that the DCM method was still very good, arguably gave the best results, but the pure ethyl acetate, generally speaking, was similar in terms of performance, aside from these one or two problem compounds that we'll be resolving. And then the hexane ethyl acetate mixture performed a little bit lower in the big picture. Most of the compounds for both of these solvents, though, still recovered within the 70 to 130% range. Another completely different consideration for the lab, that's any labs moving to these alternative solvents, are that, well, ethyl acetate's a little less volatile than DCM. It does take a little bit longer to evaporate. With our workflow, DCM took about 40 minutes, ethyl acetate was 50 to 60 minutes. So it's not a huge difference. It didn't change the number of samples that could be run in a day, but it is something, if you're really trying to keep your turnaround times as tight as possible, that would be one factor to keep in mind. We can improve, or I believe we can improve some of the results with the ethyl acetate extraction just by using basically a proper matrix match calibration. And there's still room for further optimization of other parameters, such as the elution volume, or even trying different ratios of hexane to ethyl acetate. We only tried 1:1, but there's no reason not to try different ratios. So all in all, I guess the main takeaways that I really want us to have when I'm done this talk is that using the PromoChrom MD 52530 mini discs with the SPE03 system was effective for extracting over 100 SVOC compounds. Using the inline drying columns made the workflow more efficient. Using an automated system gives you the benefit of having a very predictable runtime. So this gives predictable turnaround time when you're looking at your entire workflow. And both ethyl acetate and a hexane ethyl acetate mixture are promising candidates for completely replacing DCM with these extractions. So with that, I'll acknowledge the real brainiacs behind this project, our technical director, Raymond Chen, our GCM analyst, Heidi Lee, and our general manager, Ian Lan. And of course, I really appreciate everyone coming to this presentation. I will be around all day tomorrow, even though the booths are being dismantled as we speak. We'll be available to chat. So please, if you see me and you want to talk about any of this, just pull me aside, and I'd be more than happy to sit down with you. Thank you very much.